everybody, it's Michelle, and finally I'm able to read my story. I have not been able to make any videos at all for a week. I do all my videos on my tablet, and something happened to it about a week ago. Every time I tried to get on it, it would pop up saying that like everything was shutting down, like Google Chrome has shut down, or the Play Store shut down, or YouTube shut down, and it wouldn't let me do anything. And John's really good at computers and stuff like that, so he fixed it. It took a while, but he fixed it. So now I'm able to do my video. But I apologize for it being so grainy. I'm in the bathroom. I don't have like cool special lighting and all that. And it is not daytime where I've got natural sunlight coming in. So I am doing the best I can. But anyway, for those of y'all who don't know, I wrote a story. It's a creepy story. It is called David's Dream, and I'm so excited about it. And I posted it on my Facebook page about a week ago, and I told you I wanted to read it to you, and I'm so excited. I really hope that you find it slightly interesting and creepy, but I'll be with y'all in just a minute. David's Dream. David laid in bed, wide awake. Lately, it seemed that's all he could do, just lay there. He couldn't sleep. He knew that even if he could, it was just going to happen again. It had been happening every night for the past 2 weeks. Every night, apart from just a few short hours, he had been awake. He'd become a zombie, or at least that's what he felt like. He'd been so depressed for the past few months. His wife and son had left him because of yet another job he had lost due to his drinking, and aside from a $100 bill in his jeans pocket, he was broke. It seemed like everyone and everything he cared about was gone. He felt as though his life was over, like it had come to an end. The very day he was up in his room pacing and pacing until he caught a glimpse of someone outside, someone looking up at his house from the far end of the driveway. He realized it was his wife. "Sylvia, Sylvia," he screamed. He began pounding on his bedroom window, calling out her name over and over, but it was no use. She didn't see or hear him, and by then it was too late. She was already getting into her Mercedes and pulling out of the driveway. David had then become extremely frustrated. "Why would she come all the way out here and not even come to the door?" he said angrily. He sat back down on the edge of the bed and relit what was left of the cigarette he'd put out in the ashtray earlier. He sat there trying to make sense out of everything that was going on. For days on end, he'd been calling her, constantly begging her to come home. But every time he tried to speak to her, she would hang up on him as though he wasn't even there. "Why won't she at least hear me out?" he thought. He lay down on his back, blowing out smoke rings and realizing just how tired he was. He didn't know what to do with himself. What he did know was that he desperately needed sleep. But lately, even that had become a problem, because every time he fell asleep, he would have an odd, reoccurring dream, more like a nightmare. Every night for 2 weeks, he would doze off for a few minutes and then start to dream. He never could understand what the dream was supposed to mean, and each time it was the same experience, and he would always then wake up at the same point of the dream. He would then lay there and try and decipher what it meant. At first, he really didn't think much of it, but night after night it would continue, the same dream over and over. It really didn't make sense, but subconsciously there was something about it, something dark that made him fear it. He jumped up off the bed. "This is ridiculous," he hollered. "I'm a wreck." He walked over to the nightstand and grabbed the diminishing bottle of sleeping pills he'd been taking. He'd taken so many of them in the past few days that he'd eventually lost count. The ticking clock said it was almost 11 o'clock. "Ugh, well, maybe I'll sleep for a while at least," he mumbled. He took a couple of the pills and downed them with the last of his bottle of Crown. He got into bed, propped up on his pillows, and stared at the empty space in the bed next to him. He missed his wife so much that he couldn't deal with it. He turned on the TV and laid there for a while trying to find something, but he couldn't. His eyes began to get heavy. He yawned, and within the next few minutes, he was asleep. Not long later, David woke up. He got up, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked over at the clock above the dresser on the wall. It just hit 3 o'clock. After seeing what time it was, he started to panic. He then realized he was dreaming. Every night in his dream, the time was always the same, 3 a.m. He started feeling fear rising up inside him. His breathing became heavier. Like every other time, he got up and walked over to the bedroom door. He slowly turned the doorknob and walked out into the hallway. Once he got to the middle of the hall, he could see the metal cord hanging from the door that led to the attic, gently swaying side to side, casting a moving shadow on the wall from the moonlight filtering in through the window. Just like every other time in the dream, he hesitantly reached up, grabbed hold of the metal cord, and pulled. Down came the old wooden staircase that led to the dark attic. As it came down, it made a nauseating creak that always made him cringe. Dust particles danced around his head and made him choke. Just as every other time, this was the point he would wake up. But this time was different. He began to realize he had to go up into that attic. He could feel a sense of urgency pulling him up into the attic. "I've got to go up there," he said to himself. "Then maybe this dream will stop and I'll be able to get some real sleep." He made himself put one foot in front of the other. The further up he went, the darker it became, to where he couldn't see anything. Just as dreams are usually very strange, where they don't make sense, this one seemed to be that way. He felt like he'd been taking never-ending steps. He started counting. 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. "How many of them are there?" he said. When he finally got to the top, he walked straight into a spider web. He began tearing at his clothes and wiping his arms frantically. Long wisps of sticky silk matted into his hair and stuck to his face. "Oh, where is the cord to the light?" he asked himself. He felt around in his pants pocket for a cigarette lighter. "Man, I could use a cigarette right now," he thought. He struck the lighter many times, and finally he got a flame, just long enough to see the cord to the light bulb in the ceiling. He pulled it, and the whole room lit up. It took a second or two for his eyes to adjust. He began to look around. The large, half-empty room was almost bare. Everything was gone except for a few boxes that held his things. His wife had taken just about everything she owned with her when her and their son left. "Wow, so this is what it feels like to be completely alone," said David. While standing there, all of a sudden he began to get a cold chill. He rubbed his arms, trying to warm up. "It's usually so hot up here. Why am I so cold?" he wondered. "Why am I even up here?" He reached up to turn the light back out and leave, but a whiff of an odd smell made him stop. He walked around for a minute, trying to decide where the smell was coming from. "Please don't tell me there are dead mice up here somewhere," he said, disgusted. All of a sudden, a light creaking sound snapped him out of his thoughts. The sound seemed to be coming from another room off the main floor of the attic. The door to the room was open just a crack, but wide enough that he could just make out the edge of the window in there. He stepped slowly towards the door, and as he did, the slight smell became an awful odor that he began to recognize. The closer he got, the more nauseated he became. He put his cold hand to his nose and mouth. He stifled a gag. As he reached towards the door, he paused, terrified of what waited for him behind that door. "I've got to wake up," he breathed. "Please, please wake up," he pleaded to himself. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and opened the door with one swift movement. Then he was in. The room was bigger than what he remembered it being. It had a high ceiling with beams that overlapped each other. He stood there, frozen. He suddenly realized the source of the foul odor. Tied around the thick beam in the ceiling was a molded rope, and at the end of that rope was a badly decomposed body. It just hung there, ever so slightly swaying from side to side, making the horrific noise he'd heard in the other room. The body was so badly decomposed that there was no way to even tell who it was. It was the most horrific sight he had ever seen. The person's face was black and bloated. The sockets were hollowed out where he was certain there had once been eyes. There were pools of maggots that had very obviously eaten the flesh where the nose had once been. The mouth hung open to reveal a small portion of tongue that still clung to the back of the throat. The blackened flesh on the arms and legs had been partially eaten by the scavengers that roamed all over this corpse. David was transfixed in a horrified stare. Something sparkled in the light of the room. It grabbed David's attention. There in the floor, laying directly underneath this body, was what looked to be a ring. The corpse's half-rotten foot was dangling just above it. He bent down to retrieve it, trying with all his might to avoid touching this body. When he picked it up, he examined it and knew immediately what it was. David felt as though he'd hit a brick wall. He suddenly realized he wasn't dreaming at all. This was no dream. In an instant, everything that had happened came flooding back. Suddenly, he remembered the day his wife and son had left. She was fed up with the constant drinking, and David once again being fired because of it. She had had enough, she told him that day standing there in the kitchen. Right before she stormed out, she took off her wedding ring and threw it at him. A very drunk David looked down at the ring as his wife slammed the front door behind her. She was gone. She had finally left, just as she had threatened to do so many times before. He remembered what he had done that horrible night weeks earlier. He was in a drunken stupor by midnight that night. When he woke up at 3 a.m. that morning, he had come to a decision. He walked out into the hall and went up the stairs into the attic. He determinedly went up into that room off the attic floor. He hung a rope in the ceiling, stepped onto the stool that stood before him now, slipped his head into the noose, and jumped. The end.